The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
This week on Q&A, Huffington Post senior political reporter and politics managing editor Amanda Terkel discusses her career, the HuffPost website, and her interest in politics.
Amanda Terkel, when you were in college, you said that you wanted to get involved in a comprehensive, progressive agenda. What's that mean?
Well, I think actually when I was in college, I intended to go into politics. Journalism, we didn't really have a journalism program. I did the school newspaper for a semester, but I didn't really get a lot of guidance. So I thought I wanted to go straight into politics, and I had spent a semester in Washington with my school, Colgate University, so I saw Washington, and I thought a think tank might be an exciting place to be. I know most people don't think of think tanks as being exciting. So the Center for American Progress was starting up. One of my professors gave me Matt By's New York Times Magazine article about it, and I thought it seemed like a lot of fun. It was sort of new, it was aggressive, it was a think tank, but it wasn't your grandmother's think tank. And so I decided to apply for an internship at the Center for American Progress, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, and it was pushing a progressive agenda in a way that I think many think tanks hadn't been. It was trying to change the conversation on national security to show that progressives aren't all weak on national security. They aren't all doves, for example, showing that religious voters can also be progressive voters. So it was trying to change the conversation.
So where do these ideas come from in your life?
Well, my family has always, I think it's sort of in part because I grew up in a very small village, actually in upstate New York, under about 1,000 people. And I'm adopted. I'm from Korea. And my siblings are also adopted. My one brother's African American. My other brother is also from Korea. My parents, however, are white. My father's Jewish. My mother grew up Christian. And the rest of the town, though, however, was basically white, Christian, and conservative. So we were an anomaly in the town. And I think sort of growing up with that perspective as a minority, I think my father's father was involved in Democratic politics. So I think I sort of grew up around those sort of politics and those sorts of ideas. So it was a lot of fun growing up in that town. I think I knew I wanted to come to Washington, D.C., but I loved growing up there, and it gave me certainly a unique perspective.
Okay, what is it like to have that mixture of a family in a small town in upstate New York?
Well, it was very fun around the holidays. My dad would come in and we would teach my classmates about Hanukkah. And my bat mitzvah in town was a big event, since I was the only one getting a big party when I was 13. And so a lot of my friends came to the service. They couldn't understand Hebrew, but they appreciated it. And then afterward, we got to have a big party. But, I think I liked, because, in a lot of ways, I think growing up, I always felt like I was special, I was different, I could sort of chart my own course. It was, and, I think there was, because I was a little bit different, there was a lot of attention put on me, and I was always aware of that. But I think I was able to sort of, my siblings and I and my parents were able to educate a lot of people in town who honestly didn't really know any other Jews or Asians or African Americans. And I went to school with the same people from K through 12. We had a lot of fun. It was wonderful. And I loved growing up in a small town. I often miss being in the country and miss being in a small town. So I loved it. It was great.
Now, do you practice Judaism?
Not so much. Not as I go to high holiday services.
Well, why did, in the family, if your mother was Christian, your father was Jewish, why did you choose to go the bat mitzvah route?
Well, my parents decided to raise us Jewish, basically. So my mother never converted, but we went to services. She went to services with us. I went to Sunday school. I went up through confirmation. I helped teach Hebrew school for a couple years as part of my confirmation package, if you will. And I did my bat mitzvah. And so my parents just made a decision to raise us all Jewish.
So why did your parents adopt all these kids? Are they all adopted in the family?
Yes, my parents decided, ended up having to adopt children. They wanted to have children. So my brother's from Philadelphia, and then my other brother's from Korea, and I'm from Korea.
So do you know anything about your Korean roots?
No, not at all. And I get the question a lot of, is that something you'd like to pursue? And I haven't actually been back to Korea since I was adopted when I was 4 months old. I would be interested in going back to Korea, but I consider. A lot of people say, do you want to go find your birth parents? But I mean, I consider my family, my real family, if you will, and I don't actually have any desire to go back and sort of find my roots. I'd like to go to Korea. It seems like a great country, but my family is my family, and so I'm content with that.
What is your current job?
I am currently senior political reporter and politics managing editor at the Huffington Post.
What's that mean?
And basically, I spend most of my time reporting, but I also help set sort of the editorial direction of the politics team at Huffington Post. I don't have a beat, so campaigns, Congress, whatever is going on that I sort of have an idea or a scoop on, I write about.
I read somewhere where you're evil.
There's probably a lot of that on the internet.
There is, and I mean, what's that all about? What's the evil thing?
Well, I don't know where you read that, so.
Well, it's on the internet, but I mean, several places. I mean, it just seems like that kind of floated through.
Well, I think that.
Here's one. One of the
okay.
most dangerous women in America.
Yes, I remember making it onto a list once. I don't remember what that was about, but I think
it's the Family Security Matters group.
I vaguely remember that. I don't remember what it was about, but if when spending your time, before I was at Huffington Post, I was at the Center for American Progress, and I was working on the blog Think Progress there, and it's a progressive blog. We would often, a lot of times, sort of rebut what conservative blogs or politicians or pundits were saying, and that didn't always make people happy, and so apparently that made me evil.
Yeah, the list, I looked up some of the advisors on Family Security Matters, people like Laura Ingram's one of the advisors, and a lot of names I didn't recognize. You're in company of Code Pink, and Center for American Progress is 5. You're the 10th on the list. Think Progress. I want to show you some video that was recorded several months ago. Morley Safer, longtime veteran reporter for CBS 60 Minutes, who's basically talking about the old media versus the new media, and get your take on this.
Sure.
And I was talking about the so-called citizen journalism. And I said I would trust citizen journalism as much as I would trust a citizen surgeon. You need to work within certain disciplines. And I think the Matt Drudges and many of these others give the real thing a very bad name, because now everybody's on the internet. I mean, and one of the problems I have with the internet in terms of reading, everything looks as valid as the New York Times, whether it's the typeface, the way it's been set up. So whether you're reading somebody who believes aliens are out to get him, or reading something from the op-ed page of the New York Times, it all has the same look, makes the same visual sense.
Does he have a point?
Well, I disagree with him, perhaps not surprisingly. I've talked to a lot of people who say that, are worried about the state of journalism now. I find it very exciting to be in journalism now, and I think it's a great time for young people to be getting involved in journalism, and sort of groups of people who maybe normally wouldn't have been involved in journalism. Again, I grew up in a very small town. We had my local paper. If we were lucky, we would get the Buffalo News, and that was about it. When I went to college, the internet started to become a lot more popular, and suddenly I was online reading Salon, listening to NPR, and suddenly I just had all these news sources at my fingertips because of the internet, basically, and because of new media, and that started to get me more interested in journalism. I had always wanted to come to Washington. I started to see this as more of a possibility. And I disagree that when you go on the internet, that everything looks the same. And I think that readers and new media consumers have become a lot more discerning. You spend a lot of time on the internet, you read voices you trust. That's why a lot of times in the articles that we write, we will do our own reporting, but maybe I'll use a quote that someone gave Reuters or someone gave the Washington Post, and I'll link to the Washington Post or I'll link to Reuters, and I'll give them credit. And so that allows readers a lot of exploration that you don't get in print media. So you can read an article by your favorite author. They might say, hey, go over to Andrew Sullivan and check out what he has on his blog. You go to Andrew Sullivan. He'll maybe reference Ta-Nehisi Coates on The Atlantic. You've never heard of him. You go over there. And that's what I like. You start to figure out who you trust, which sources you trust. Absolutely. There's things I read on the internet, a blog I've never seen. I don't really know whether or not I should trust it. And so usually I will sort of look into it a bit more myself. But that's what I like about new media. Readers, I think, become more savvy and become more intelligent, and it's a process of discovering, and it's a much more sort of interactive way of getting your news.
Who owns the Huffington Post?
Well, Ariana is in charge of it, and I believe she owns it. And we are part of AOL.
And what does that matter to you, that she owns it or runs it, or at least she started it?
Yes, and she, she's still involved in the site. She's not one of those people who sort of started the site and stepped back. I mean, she what I really like about working for Ariana and working at the Huffington Post is that what we as reporters write, it's not driven by what's going to be popular, what's going to get clicks. The stories this week, we're doing we've recently been doing a series on Black America. And, these are stories that might not, get all the clicks and might not be tweeted out as much, but these are stories that we feel are important. We have someone named Arthur Delaney who covers sort of economic suffering, people who are just sort of being pushed under in this sort of new economy and are having trouble getting their food stamps, getting back on their feet after they've lost their jobs. And so I really like the freedom that we're given at Huffington Post, and that's part of when you work online and you don't have a print publication. So you can write longer stories, you can go more in depth, you can combine that with video and new media and give the reader sort of a fuller package.
I have on my lap here my iPad, and it's got the Huffington Post up here with the headline, and it's one of your trademarks, a big red headline, emergency, NSA calls secret briefing to protect powers. This is a couple weeks ago as people are watching this now because this is recorded. What advice do you have? Up here, there's so much information. Front page, politics, business, entertainment, tech, media, world, healthy living, comedy, lifestyle. How would you advise people to deal with this website?
It's overwhelming when you first go there. I remember when I first went to Huffington Post, I felt the same way. I talked to a lot of people who go to the Huffington Post and figure out how do they navigate it. A lot of people just go to the front page and will click on the stories from there. Some people will look at the top and say, I'm interested in politics and sports and maybe entertainment. I'll click on those. But more and more, I'm finding people are simply going on Facebook and looking at what links their friends share. And they say they find Huffington Post that way. Their friends will post a story. It'll be from Huffington Post. They'll click on the story. And that's the way they discover Huffington Post, is through their friends sharing stories on social media.
I'm going to push this button right up here. It says live. I'm not sure I can pull it up right away, but this is your television effort, and it'll come up here. What can you tell us about your television effort? How much are you doing with live television?
Well, that's HuffPost Live, and so basically it's streaming on our site all day long, and it covers pretty much every topic, just like Huffington Post: politics, sports, entertainment, the environment, pretty much everything. And we have hosts in New York and LA. We have some people in DC. We have Huffington Post reporters going on. We also bring in lots of sort of noteworthy guests. But so what's unique about it is it's all done through Google Hangouts. So we bring in community members too, just people who are viewers and might want to have a say. And so they can join in the conversation. They can ask questions and give their thoughts as well.
I'm looking at something right now, and if somebody's never heard of a Google Hangout, how does it work?
It's sort of like Skype. Basically, if you have a camera on your computer and you have a Gmail account or a Google Hangout account, you can sort of just they send you a link, you click on, and suddenly you can see all the people you're talking to, and it's a lot of fun. It's great technology.
Right up here's a button that says "Be an on-air guest."
Yes, I think you can click that, and it will submit your request, and then you may have a producer to contact you.
How do you keep track of all this? I mean, and what kind of on a normal day for you, what do you look at yourself?
Well, I try to look everywhere. My morning actually starts with I get the print version of the Washington Post still, so I peruse that. I still enjoy getting the print version of the paper because I find that reading the newspaper, you tend to read more. I'll tend to read sort of the entire post and rather than just the headlines. But beyond that, I am listening to talk radio, I am watching C-SPAN, I am watching cable news, I am going to as many news sources. I have lots of Google News alerts set up for topics and people I'm following and interested in covering. And so I am trying to look at Twitter, Facebook, I'm trying to look everywhere.
What's the number one issue you're interested in?
That's interesting. I think that changes on a daily basis, quite honestly. One big thing right now that I'm covering is sequestration. I think it just touches the country and the economy in so many different ways, and I hear from a lot of people who are being furloughed, who can't get into Head Start, and so that's been something I'm covering.
One of the things I found doing research for your visit was something dominates next to your name almost all through the process. I'm going to run an old MSNBC Keith Olbermann story that you're involved in and get you to explain this and whether if that has defined you in this world. Let's watch this.
And yet what O'Reilly did to Ms. Terkel was far worse. One of O'Reilly's producers, Jesse Waters, and a cameraman ambushed her right after she had checked into a hotel with a friend during a vacation in Winchester, Virginia. Ms. Terkel surmised that the two men must have staked out her apartment and followed her car for 2 hours to the vacation destination. They asked her about her then 3-week-old post. The ambush interview was the centerpiece of O'Reilly's rant last night.
You wrote a blog about Bill O'Reilly going to speak for this rape function, this charity group, and you attacked him personally, and you attacked the foundation, and you brought a lot of pain and suffering to this group. What's your reaction?
What I remember was highlighting a comment that Bill O'Reilly had said, and that's what I remember doing. I don't remember attacking the foundation.
What did Bill O'Reilly say?
I can't remember exactly what he had said because it was a while ago, but I remember it was something having to do with he had talked about a rape victim in a derogatory way that seemed to place the blame for the rape on the victim.
So what else do you want to say about this event, and what year did it happen?
That happened in, I believe it was March 2009. I was in Winchester, Virginia, which is a couple of hours away from Washington, D.C., and I have never gotten an explanation for how they tracked me down. We tried to contact Fox News, and they never replied. Although, in retrospect, my boyfriend and I remember seeing a car following us the entire time. So what most likely happened is they found my apartment, saw us leave, maybe thought I was going to the store, and ended up having to follow us for several hours to cross state lines to Virginia. But that was sort of an unfortunate episode, I think. It was sort of a low for journalism. I had linked to a blog post by another blog noting that Bill O'Reilly was going to speak at a foundation to benefit rape victims. And I had pointed out that he had said some very controversial comments about rape victims. And I never called for a boycott of the group. I never attacked the group. I simply highlighted this other blog post that this was happening. They never called and asked me for comment. They simply tracked me down, ambushed me. I was on vacation. I did not remember what I had written 3 weeks ago, and the result was basically this. And it brought a lot of attention. When you get that sort of attention and you are described as evil or a far left blogger or hurting rape victims, you don't sort of know what attention that will bring. And so for a while, for example, my office locked its doors. They weren't sure what was going to happen. It ended up being fine, and in part, I think it was fine because we knew that Bill O'Reilly's segment would air Monday evening. We're a blog. We can respond a lot quicker. So I wrote down what happened. I put it out there and put up a post, and it got a lot of attention. And it wasn't just from other progressive bloggers. It was from a lot of conservative bloggers, too, who said what he did was inappropriate. No one, that sort of conduct should not happen. And I don't think it reflected well for Bill O'Reilly.
Is there a residual on this for you? I mean, what were you doing when that happened?
Well, I guess.
Were you at Center for American Progress then?
I was at Center for American Progress. I was at Think Progress. In the end, I think it was. I ended up I was a sort of, I guess, a little known blogger. I ended up getting a lot of attention for that. At the time, Keith Olbermann and Bill O'Reilly were sort of in a feud. So I went on, Keith Olbermann had me on his show. And so I got a lot more exposure from that. And the residuals, I would say, lasted for a couple years. You know, people would say, oh, I remember you. I saw you on Bill O'Reilly's show. I think that has died down, but it did start a conversation, I think, about whether this sort of ambush journalism was acceptable.
So what was the lesson for you out of all this? I mean, what you had is, I think MSNBC did 7 different shows on this, or 7 different pieces.
It was a few.
And Bill O'Reilly and Keith Olbermann were calling each other names during that whole process. Is that good for journalism?
I mean,
people watch it.
Yes, people watch it, and whether it's, you know, from my perspective, is it good for journalism? I don't think that it's good to, when you don't like someone, what they write, that you go and track them down without any warning. Again, it's not like I had been ignoring their calls or anything like that. They never contacted me for comment. They never contacted me to ask me on their show. And they knew how to get in touch with us because they had other Center for American Progress guests on the Bill O'Reilly show, on the O'Reilly Factor. So, you know, just to simply, it wasn't journalism. They weren't trying to get a real response from me. They were trying to intimidate me. And, you know, as a young woman who was living alone, to then have a couple of men follow her and come and ambush her. Again, in the end, I don't think it reflected well on Bill O'Reilly, who was trying to show that he was sympathetic to women who had been victims of rape.
Have you changed any of your personal habits because of this?
I haven't, but it did make me more aware, and it made me a little more careful. And when I speak to a lot of young journalists, young women journalists, you know, I tell them that just, you know, you should be aware, you should be careful. I monitor a lot of the emails I get, a lot of the hate mail. I think getting hate mail is something that probably every journalist gets, but I keep track of them. If anything sort of starts to repeat, or, you know, I just keep track of that, and I tell young journalists that they should too.
You have a Twitter account and a Facebook account. Any other way besides Huffington Post that you communicate with people?
I would Twitter, Facebook, and email, and my stories are pretty much the main ways.
Who is behind Amanda Terkel?
I was wondering if you would bring that up. Terkel Rage is a parody Twitter account started by some of my friends. So it's a friendly parody account, but I think it's hilarious. I think they do a very good job. It has nothing to do with me. It's just a sort of a crazy fake person who's always angry at everything.
And they seem to love to use a lot of language in there. I mean,
yes, you probably can't read it all on air.
Well, I can. I mean, I can. Where the F is this baby is the one I'm just looking at.
About the royal baby.
About the royal baby. Just spoke to the royal baby. It wants to tell you that you're unloved and should effing die. I mean, and you know the people that are doing this.
I do.
Do you like them using your name?
It's fine. I knew when they were starting it. I knew when they were starting it. They pulled my picture. I said that was fine, and it's honestly been hilarious. I have a lot of people now who refer to me as Terkel Rage. I've had a couple people who actually think that's my real Twitter account. I have to tell them that's not actually me. I'm not angry all the time.
Well, when I looked at it, I said, she must be behind this.
No, not behind it. But it's very clever and angry.
You want to tell us who's doing it?
I can't. No, it's a secret.
Do you go into a rage?
No, I don't go into a rage. I get worked up. I'm passionate about the news and politics, but I'm not like that.
How do we know when you're being passionate?
Well, hopefully, it comes across in my writing. I don't use that sort of language in my writing, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of issues that people care about, and hopefully when we highlight those things, some feeling comes through. I don't think journalism should be so removed and so distant, and necessarily if a side is wrong or if a side is lying, I think they should be called out. I don't think that they should be given equal time with the truth. So hopefully that comes across in the writing.
Back to your roots at home, what did your parents do?
My dad was a photographer. He took family portraits, things like that, and he worked at the school as a teacher's aide for quite a while. And my mother worked for a long time, the local Chevrolet dealership in the office.
And so where did you get your interest in politics?
I don't know. It was my my father's father, my grandfather, who passed away before I was born, was involved in politics. So I don't think it came there since I never knew him. But in school, I liked history. I liked English. For a long time, I intended to be a high school English teacher. But I think a lot of it was when I took a class field trip to Washington, and I really enjoyed being in Washington. I enjoyed being in politics. And in high school, I started to look at, could I get involved with local politics? We would have politicians come to our district and talk, and so I would try to go to those. And by the time it was ready for me to go to college, I knew I was going to be a political science major. Part of the reason I chose Colgate was because of its great Washington study program. And so I think coming to Washington inspired me. Hopefully it still does for some people. I don't know if it does these days.
We'll go back to that first time you came here. How old were you?
It was in 8th grade. It was a big class field trip.
And what do you remember from that trip that had an impact on you?
A lot of it was fuzzy. We went, we did a lot of the tourist attractions. We went to the White House. We went to the Capitol. But I think just being around all of this, and I ended up going back again my senior year for another class trip. And then I did a program called Presidential Classroom, which brought a lot of young people who are interested in politics and getting involved in all of that down to DC. And to be around all of these other people who wanted to be involved in politics, for me, was really energizing. And I think that was part of what sort of cemented that I wanted to go and study political science and get involved in politics.
So would you call yourself a journalist now, or would you call yourself an activist?
I am a journalist now. When I made the switch to Huffington, when I was at the Center for American Progress, it was a unique job because I could do some journalism, I could do some advocacy, I could do some politics, I could do policy, and it was a nice mix. But what I really liked from that job was the journalism part. I loved reporting. I loved getting scoops. I loved talking to people, going to events. And so when Huffington Post had an opening for a reporter, I was very interested in that. I felt like I wanted to do more reporting. It was something I thought I needed to get better at, and it was what I loved. And so at Huffington Post, I now get to report, I get to help edit and manage, and I love it.
Do you know how many people come to Huffington Post every day?
I don't.
You've never seen a number?
I maybe have, but I luckily don't have to concern myself with that too much.
Recently, you were on a panel for something called Netroots 2013. What is Netroots?
Netroots Nation is a gathering of progressive journalists or progressive activists mostly. It started out for bloggers, but there aren't as many bloggers. I think sort of the internet's moved away from blogs. So now it's a lot of sort of activists, basically. And I was there on a panel. I was also there covering. There was some speakers and events going on. So I was there covering it, but I was also doing a panel.
Again, help people understand how to watch this news when people are activists and are involved. Jess McIntosh, who was on that panel with you, is from Emily's List. What's Emily's List?
Emily's List is a pro-choice pro-choice organization that supports women who run for office and who are Democrats.
The reason I want to run this clip when she's talking about the ability for people like her to influence the liberal press. Let's watch what she said.
Progressive leaning, I don't even know how to say, they're not partisan allies at all. There is no chance that I could call up anybody at HuffPo or at Mother Jones or at TPM and kill a story that was bad for Democrats or pitch a story that was crap. They would be mad at me. So I tend to, like, those outlets have that reputation, but the journalism is absolutely solid and not slanted at all. And I think that is understood and respected by other journalists.
Should people watching believe her?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you read a story on Huffington Post, we have comments from Harry Reid, but we'll also have comments from Mitch McConnell's office. And we will, we have Republican aides who talk to us all the time, Republican members who talk to us who love Huffington Post. Same on the Democratic side. We also have people on both sides who hate us. So, and I think we let our reporting speak for itself. Of course, I think there are people who hear Huffington Post or hear other outlets and immediately don't trust them. There are many people I've run into, for example, at Tea Party rallies who don't trust the New York Times. But, again, I think if you read our reporting, I think it speaks for itself.
We just had on the screen, you didn't see it, I'm going to put it up there again, a headline from earlier today on the Huffington Post. You can see it. It's called Ouch. And you see the two leaders there. Who writes those?
We have a team of people who writes them, and usually it's sort of often it's crowdsourced. So they will say, "Here are some ideas we're thinking of. Does anyone have other ideas?" And people will all throw in their ideas. But we do have a team of people who run the front page, then a team of people who run the politics page, and they're responsible for coming up with headlines, making sure we have the breaking news, making sure all the pictures look great, and writing headlines is an art that takes a long time to master. So we have a talented group of people who does that.
If you write an article, could you write the headline for it?
Yes, and sometimes they will change them, but we know our story better than anyone else, and so we suggest headlines. And again, they may change them, they may accept them, but ultimately it is our story.
You have any idea how many people work for the Huffington Post?
Aggregately, no. In the D.C. office, most of the staff is in New York, but in the D.C. office itself, we have about 60 people. Most of it is the politics team.
We took some videos, of your office, and I want to show that on the screen. And I understand that you're moving in this time frame, but this will give people an idea of what it looks like up close. Why do journalists sit so close together without any separation, without a cubicle, and how can you think when you're writing?
We feed off of each other's energy, so we are IMing each other, and we're on GChat all day long. But we also
Wait a minute. IMing means what?
We're online and just on Gmail and sending each other messages online. But we also just honestly like to shout out ideas to each other. So we like to sit close together. We like to talk. I could work from home, but it's a lot more useful when I'm in the office because I hear what everyone else is thinking and hear what everyone else is saying. And that gives me better ideas.
What's the average age of people in that room?
Average age, probably around 30.
But you don't have those grizzled old timers like Marley Safer sitting around in the corner somewhere?
I don't know if Howard Feynman would want to be called a grizzled old veteran, but we have Howard in the office, although he was not in that shot. So, it is a very young office. I think, people who work in new media often tend to be young. It's what they've grown up with. So even for me, I feel like I'm getting a little older for it. So people who are just graduating from college, they've only known like social media, new media, online stuff, and this just, we don't have to teach them. Here's how you have a Twitter account. They just know it.
Here's some video of you at that same Netroots Nation session where you're talking about video journalism.
If you go to your local member's town hall and you get a great clip and think the Huffington Post will love that. If you send it to the media, I want to stress that one important thing is that you send as much of the clip as possible. I've had many people try to pitch, here's 10 seconds of a lawmaker saying something really crazy. Put it up. I'm not going to put that up because I have no idea if you're taking them out of context. And what, as a reporter, I don't want to happen is I don't want to receive blowback and have a lawmaker then say, well, you're taking me out of context, and I have no response.
Have people done what you want them to do? Send you the whole clip?
I think people are learning. Morley Safer talked about this a little bit. He mentioned citizen journalism, and he also talked about Matt Drudge of the Drudge Report. I think those are different things. I wouldn't call Matt Drudge a citizen journalist. I consider citizen journalists who are just people. They're not journalists, and they are out and they see something interesting. They capture it on their phone, maybe, and then they send it to reporters. A lot of outlets like Huffington Post, or I think CNN had CNN iReport. You can write up something that accompanies it. That's why video is so powerful. You don't know who these citizen journalists are, so you probably don't trust them. But if they have video proof, that makes it a lot more compelling. If you send 10 seconds of what a congressman said and it sounds crazy, I don't think anyone will trust you. But if you send the entire 30-minute town hall and you see the question that was asked of the congressman, what the congressman said, and it still seems controversial, I think then the media will take a little bit more notice.
On the iPad I have here, and on the front page or the home page of Huffington Post, here is all things Ariana. Down here, Ariana's upcoming schedule, her TV appearances, radio and podcast appearances, Ariana in print, speeches and public appearances, and you can get on there and find out almost anything that she's talked about in the last several months. Why do you have that on there?
People love Ariana. She's a big, people, when she writes columns, they're incredibly popular with our readers, and Ariana is sort of a social media wizard, I think. She has a great Instagram, a great Twitter account, great Facebook account. She puts pictures up of, you know, wherever she is in the world and what she's doing. And people follow her. People are interested in what she's doing. She's always doing interesting things. She has interesting things to say. So that's a way for people to stay updated with her.
What works? What gets people's attention?
Well, on Huffington Post, I think it depends. Certain topics, I think, tend to be popular with our audiences. Things on Guantanamo Bay are very popular with our audiences. Stories on drones, stories on Ron Paul actually tend to be very popular. I think there are a lot of Ron Paul fans out there looking for Ron Paul news. Online news about marijuana tends to be very popular, and that, I think, is why whenever you see the president, for example, take questions from people online, there's always a question about pot in there somewhere. So it's certain topics, I think, draw people's attention. Certain people, too, draw readers' attention. They like reading. I mean, Mitt Romney obviously was very popular during the election, things about Obama, things about Michelle Obama. So certain people, too, attract our reader, and they want to read those stories.
Here's some video of Mitt Romney that you'll recognize. Everybody will recognize it. And I want to ask what you think this kind of thing does to the whole discussion.
47% of Americans pay no income tax. So our message of low taxes doesn't connect. And he'll be out there talking about tax cuts for the rich. I mean, that's what they sell every 4 years. And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them that they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives. What I have to do is convince the 5 to 10% in the Senate.
Video, it came from Mother Jones, which is a left of center magazine. It was recorded, as I remember, wasn't it by the bartender or somebody that sat up there, and then it was facilitated with Jimmy Carter's grandson to David Corn. Good or bad for the system, and did he get a bad, should he have gotten as bad a rap as he got on saying what he said?
Well, I mean, I don't like it, and I think a lot of people don't like it, which is why this video is so popular, when politicians appear to be saying one thing in public settings and another thing in private settings to wealthy donors. And I think that is part of the reason this video was so popular. Voters don't like if they think they're being lied to or a politician is trying to swindle them. And what Mitt Romney said was obviously not quite what he was saying on the campaign trail, and that is why it was so popular. I think Mitt Romney deserved the criticism he received for that comment. It was, it portrayed a large portion of the American public in a very unfair, negative light, and it started, I think, a conversation on whether that was accurate, what that sort of part of the population, how was it being served by politicians, and I think it got the attention it deserved.
So, from your experience, who tells the truth both behind the scenes and in front of the camera? I mean, if you look at, just as an observer, you look at both sides, a lot of people are saying things that they're going to do in a campaign, they end up doing the opposite. So how do we trust? Where do you draw the line?
Well, a lot of times the politicians that one side or the other maybe doesn't like, they tend to be more outspoken. A lot of those politicians, what they're saying may shock people in public, but they're saying those same things in private, which is part of the reason a lot of times they do catch on. But, opening up fundraisers more, letting the public know when politicians are doing fundraisers, getting more media into those types of events, I think that is good, and I think that those sort of things shouldn't be close to the public just because they can't pay the money to get in.
So, who's your favorite politician?
In history?
Just, it could be now, it could be in history. I mean, give us an idea of the kind of people that you have followed over the years and admired.
Well, I just read a biography by Nancy Unger of Senator Bob LaFollette, a Republican from Wisconsin, a very progressive senator known as Fighting Bob LaFollette, and fascinating. And I think he's been named by his peers as one of the 7 greatest senators in history. And he was, he was incredibly progressive. I think some of his ideas were a little ahead of his time. He was not always well liked. But he helped institute the 8-hour workday, women's suffrage, rights for unions, the direct election of senators, and just sort of he was unstoppable. He pushed for this his entire life. He tried to run for president. It didn't work out, in part because he could ruffle feathers, and people didn't always get along with him. He was very stubborn, and he said what was on his mind. And I just find what he accomplished and sort of his ideas and what it led to FDR taking up a lot of those same progressive ideas. I just think was remarkable.
Who else?
Another person I've always admired is. I guess she was a public figure, maybe not a politician, was Frances Perkins, the first female cabinet secretary. She was FDR's labor secretary, and it was a time that women tended not to be in public life. Her biggest achievement was probably getting Social Security in place, and she's just remarkable. I've always admired her.
How about today? People that you see today?
Well, I would say this is someone I love interviewing today is Bill Clinton. Everyone knows that he likes to talk. He's interesting, and I've had the occasion to sit down with him over several years and tend to be in small group settings. And any question you throw at him, no matter what obscure policy topic it is on, he loves people. He will opine long after his aides sort of tap their watch and indicate it's time to go. He'll keep talking. And there's just sort of a genuine curiosity there for all sorts of policy topics that makes him a very fun interview subject.
You got involved as a pool reporter for when Mrs. Obama was out doing something that kind of led to a controversy. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it was my first time doing pool duty, and
explain that.
And basically generally one reporter is chosen to, they can't let a lot of press in, and it was a small event, so they choose one reporter to basically go, write a report on everything that happens, and then you send it out to other reporters, the rest of the reporters on the White House press list. And so they couldn't be there, but they get the report, and it's shared with all reporters, and all news outlets can use it. Michelle Obama tends not to make as much news as her husband. So we went to a small backyard fundraiser in Washington, D.C. She was saying very standard remarks, and then there was a protester, which is very rare at a Michelle Obama event. And the protester was calling for equality for gays and lesbians. And Michelle Obama, again, not used to dealing with protesters, didn't like it, stepped down from the lectern and confronted the protester and basically said, if you want to talk, that's fine, but I'm leaving. The other guests got very mad at the protester. She was taken out. Michelle Obama continued. But it attracted a lot of news. It was a very sort of unexpected reaction from the First Lady, and it was unexpected that she was being protested in the first place.
Back to the Netroots Conference and a gentleman by the name of Rodel Molino, is that the way you pronounce it? This has to do with political opponents caught on tape, and it explains itself.
And if there was anyone who actually, going back to to Romney, anyone who sold American Bridge better than I could, or anyone that works for us, it was Eric Fernstrom. When right after the Eric Fernstrom, who was Romney's chief strategist, right after the election, he was asked a question pretty much where he said, your guy said a lot of extreme things to win this primary. You don't think this is going to help hurt him in the general? And he's like, well, pretty much he said voters are stupid. And he's like, it's an etch a sketch. We can just etch a sketch this all away, and people are going to forget about it, and you start clean. No, you can't start clean.
What do you think?
He's right. You can't. Now there are groups like American Bridge on the left. America Rising is now.
That's a PAC.
Yes, that's a super PAC. And they are dedicated to doing research and tracking GOP candidates. So when a GOP candidate has an event, they take a camera and they don't confront the candidate. They just stand there and videotape it. So all their words are caught on tape. And now Republicans are starting a super PAC to do this too, America Rising. And so now, if you say something, whether it's on a TV show or it's at one of your events, someone will probably see it. It will be caught on tape. And then when you run for office later down the line, someone will bring it up. So I think we saw that, voters aren't forgetting this stuff. Todd Akin, for example, had a very controversial comment about rape, and that stuck with him. He was not able to shake that off.
We have that comment actually from Todd Akin, and we'll remind our audience what this was all about because he didn't make it because of this.
If an abortion could be considered in a case of, say, a tubal pregnancy or something like that, what about in the case of rape? Should it be legal or not?
Well, you know, people always want to try and make that as one of those things. Well, how do you slice this particularly tough sort of ethical question? It seems to me, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. But let's assume that maybe that didn't work or something. You know, I think there should be some punishment, but the punishment ought to be in the rapist and not attacking the child.
What did he say wrong?
Well, what he said was scientifically inaccurate. A woman who has been raped cannot just decide to not get pregnant. That's physically impossible. And also what a lot of people were upset about was that he used legitimate rape, as if some women who are raped aren't telling the truth. If some rapes aren't legitimate, some rapes are illegitimate. So I think, you know, a lot of women reacted to this, and, you know, he is someone who is trying to set policy on women's reproductive rights, yet he doesn't even seem to understand how the female body works. And it was just, you know, Democrats had been saying that Republicans were waging a war on women, trying to legislate too much on abortion and access to contraception. And this then just did not help Republicans. Todd Akin was never able to recover from it, and he lost his Senate seat, his Senate race.
Richard Murdoch of Indiana was running and had a not exact same comment, but a similar controversy. Here's what he said during the campaign.
I know there are some who disagree, and I respect their point of view, but I believe that life begins at conception. The only exception I have to have an abortion is in that case of the life of the mother. I struggled with it myself for a long time, but I came to realize life is that gift from God, and I think even when life begins in that horrible situation of rape, that it is something that God intended to happen.
What did he say wrong?
Well, he was basically saying that God wanted women to be raped, and these babies are sort of gifts from God, and that's why they shouldn't abort them. And I think part of the reason he got so much attention is because Todd Akin had already made his other comments. So I think people just sort of threw up their hands in exasperation that more, including Republicans, that more Republican candidates were sort of saying things like this and just basically hurting them with a lot of women voters.
Why do we constantly talk about abortion and rape? And since I've been in this town forever and ever, it seems every year it's an issue. Why is that, do you think?
That's a great question. I have no idea. We keep hearing politicians say that they are going to focus on the economy. The economy is going to be their number one focus. And then we hear about some lawmaker who brings up a bill to defund Planned Parenthood, to ban abortions after 20 weeks. Why this keeps coming up? I don't know. I think many people on both sides of the aisle would like to see it stop coming up, but there are still many anti-abortion lawmakers who believe that they need to push this while they're in office. And a lot of the action is happening on the state level. Republicans control a lot of state legislatures. Many Republican lawmakers are pushing this legislation. We're not seeing it quite as much as the federal level lately, but in the states, definitely.
What do you think will happen in 2016?
I try not to make those predictions. I feel like a lot of people who make them end up looking silly. But, you know, in terms of the Senate right now, Republicans have a good chance at taking back control of the Senate. They need to take 6 seats from Democrats. There are 3 seats that Democrats are retiring in, and it looks like they will go to Republicans. Then there are maybe 3 or 4 that look good for Republicans. Democrats could win those. But the landscape looked good for Republicans in 2012, and they managed to lose seats in 2012. So it's very early, too early to predict.
What do you think? Well, I know it's early, but on the presidential side of things.
In 2016.
Yes.
Right, that was 2014. So in 2016, I think it will depend on whether or not Hillary Clinton runs. If she runs, I think. I don't think you'll see many other Democrats running, obviously. I think in terms of Republicans, I don't know who will want to challenge her. I think many Republicans will realize that she has a good shot. They may want to take her on, or they may decide to wait until maybe she's not running, or maybe she loses or whatever, and they might have a better shot. If she doesn't run, I think the field is wide open. Republicans have a lot of sort of young stars on their side, people like Marco Rubio, maybe Chris Christie. Democrats, they have a couple people like Cory Booker, Andrew Cuomo, but it would be a much wider field and a much more of a sort of a wild card.
Where do you think this whole business of communications is going to be in another 10 years?
I wish I knew. I would invest and start something, but we will. What I hope doesn't happen is, I don't want to see the loss of print journalism. I don't want to see. I'm frustrated when I see the loss of so much sort of state and local journalism covering what's happening in city councils, what's happening on the ground, because a lot of this national journalism isn't as good if you don't have that local journalism. A lot of what I do is reading local and state stories, seeing what's happening at that level, and figuring out how it's bubbling up to the national level. And so if there aren't people on the ground doing that sort of work, again, I think national journalism suffers quite a bit. So I really hope that someone figures out a way how to keep that sustainable and keep those people in place. We're going to see a lot more social media, I think, where people don't maybe go to the websites of news outlets quite as much, but they simply see stories being shared by others, by what their friends are talking about, and news sort of goes that way rather than you go to, sort of these 4 websites.
On my sheet of paper here, I found you started out with some internships. You worked for Senator Charles Schumer?
That's right. I interned for Senator Schumer in Buffalo and Washington, D.C.
What did you learn there?
Well, I learned that you get a lot of callers who have a lot of very strange concerns sometimes. But I really loved especially working in the Buffalo office, because that was where you got to interact with the constituents directly. People just needing very small things that just a simple call from a senator's office could get their paperwork expedited. And that was really gratifying. And then to have people come into the office and thank you for your help. And I was just an intern, but again, a simple call just saying what's the status on this could just make a world of difference. And it was nice to sort of see these constituent services at work.
What did you do in the office of the New York Attorney General?
There I tended to, it was actually very similar. It was a lot of times people would have problems with businesses or companies, and they would write in with their complaints. We would sort of...
Who was the Attorney General?
Eliot Spitzer. And so we would look into, and I worked in his office in Buffalo. We would look into these complaints. We might make a call. We might send a letter. A lot of times these things were resolved once they realized the Attorney General was looking. And again, it wasn't, I was an intern, so it was not at a high level, but simply making a phone call, simply sending a letter could make a world of difference for these people who had been waiting for some sort of resolution for a long time.
Do you have an opinion on what Eliot Spitzer did when he was governor, stepped down, and now he's running again? What do you think of that?
Well, obviously, I think what he did was wrong, and I think disappointed a lot. It disappointed a lot of people who had voted for him, who trusted him. And now I think that voters, I think, but at the same time, he was a very effective, especially as an attorney general. He helped turn that office around. A lot of people really, really loved what he did. He aggressively went after Wall Street, and I think that some people may be willing to sort of forgive what he did on the personal side because they liked what he did in public life. We'll see. There are a lot of sort of cases like this out there between Eliot Spitzer, Anthony Weiner. We have. And so I think people are sort of waiting to see if they're ready to trust these people based on their public record.
If you were married and your husband did that to you, what would you do?
In terms of how I would react, for example, I think that is a tough position for the spouse to be in. We've seen different reactions, for example, with Jenny Sanford, who just wanted nothing to do with what her husband did. And, honestly, I can't say, and I don't want to pass judgment on. I think some of these political spouses get a lot of judgment passed on them. How could she, with Hillary Clinton, how could she have stood by Bill Clinton after she did that? Or good for Jenny Sanford for doing that. But I don't think you can say and you can judge them without actually being in their position and sort of knowing what their relationship was, what they went through. And so I just, I could not say without being in that position.
A lot of politicians, a lot of people think that this country's in store for a bad time when it comes to the money and the deficit and the debt and all that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think often there is a little too much attention put on the debt and the deficit. Cutting back, for example, with sequestration, it helps the deficit in the debt situation, but is it really the best thing to do? Is it really good to kick people off the Head Start rolls in order to lower the deficit a little bit? I think that, obviously, at a time when the economy is not doing that well, people don't have jobs, cutting back on the spending is perhaps, not quite what has shown to be working, when rather more stimulus and things like that. So I think Washington often gets wrapped up in the debt and the deficit and sort of doesn't go beyond and look at what's going on in the rest of the country and how this is having an effect with people on the ground, people who don't have jobs and can't get back on their feet, and also now can't get the government benefits that were there for them as a safety net.
So should we say you're not worried about this, about your own future?
I think, I think that you're always a little bit worried. You see that, I think, people want to do better than their parents, do as well as their parents did, or do better. And you see a lot of people who, you have friends who can't find jobs, you have family members who can't find jobs, and that, you're not immune from that. And I think that's something that, especially in the journalism profession, journalists are worried about. You have a lot of friends who are reporters who are getting laid off. Their papers are folding. Entire photography staffs are being laid off, like it happened in Chicago. So as a reporter, I think you're always watching that and very concerned.
Go back to the family. You have a Korean brother who's adopted. You have an African-American brother who's adopted. Your father is Jewish. Your mother is a Christian. You had a bat mitzvah at age 13, I assume. What about, we've had a lot of discussion in this country about prejudice. What would you say about that? And did you face prejudice at all? And is your prejudice, if you did, different than your African-American brother's prejudice?
I mean, I can't speak for what he went through, but I think, yes, there is some prejudice. I think that, a lot of times people, and I think this is something a lot of Asians go through, people will come up and start speaking gibberish to you as if you could understand it because it sounds Chinese. You get a lot of people who come up to you and just assume that you can't speak English properly. And you get a lot of that. And it's mostly ignorance. It mostly doesn't really affect my life. I think being a woman and being in politics and journalism, you also have to deal with some sexism. People making comments that simply, for example, Congressman Steve Cohen the other day said to a female Real Clear Politics reporter, when she asked him a question about something, he said, "You're very attractive, but I'm not going to speak to you about that today." How she looks should not come into play, and that's something I think a lot of male reporters don't have to deal with. So I think, again, when I talk to younger journalists, I tell them that's something they should be aware of. It will happen. And what I liked about the Real Clear Politics reporter is that she tweeted about it and called it out and made people aware that it had happened.
You're a 2004 graduate, near the top of your class there at Colgate?
Yes.
Got the right date. Now, here's a question that a lot of older people would ask you, and you've been asked before, I know, but answer it once and for all. Is Studs Terkel your grandfather?
I get that. I do get that. No, he's not my grandfather. I think on my dad's side, he may somehow be distantly related on my dad's side, but I don't know exactly what it is, but definitely not my grandfather.
And do you know who Studs, did you ever study who he was?
I mean, I've read some pieces by him. I don't think I studied him, but I had read some pieces by him. But growing up, I knew the name. I wasn't super aware of him, and I don't think I really read anything by him until college.
So where are you going to be in 10 years?
I don't know. I think it's great. I don't want to know.
Would you rather be a politician or would you rather be a journalist?
I love journalism. I want to stay in journalism. I have no interest in becoming a politician.
So they can find your writing at Huffington Post?
Yes.
Do they click on the politics section?
Politics section is a great place to go, or HuffingtonPost.com. Amanda-Terkel is where all my stories are stored.
Amanda Terkel, we thank you very much for joining us.
Great, thank you.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at Q&A.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.